Try this again. So my recording system is acting up today for whatever reason. So I'm going to record locally and then upload it afterwards. Alright, cool. Alright guys, so at the very top here, we've already went over a couple of navigation features, a little bit about the pen tool, a little bit about the text. Alright, now let's get into our shape tools here. And let's start off with a circle. Alright, so when you press and hold on the shape icon, you get some options here. I'm going to go to the ellipse tool in the middle. Click and drag in our canvas area, press and hold shift so we can get a perfect circle. Then let go of my left click and let go of shift. Alright, come down here and just rename this circle. Alright, and then kind of the same thing with the strokes we did for the pen tool. Except in reverse. It's going to add some fill. So I'm going to come up here to the fill, pick a solid color, okay, then pick a specific color. Alright, and then as far as the stroke, you can either take that off or leave it on for now. Alright, so there's going to be a couple of things we can do with shapes here in After Effects. So what we're going to start with is movement, so like keyframing. We're going to do a small project called the bouncing ball, a classic project for a lot of animation artists. And basically what we want this to do is to bounce on a ground surface and then slowly come to a stop, just using keyframes. Alright, so that's going to involve our timeline down here. Let's make sure it's all set up here. Alright, and then let's get at least, let's say 15 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my composition settings. It's a number of ways. Excuse me. Right click in the canvas area, composition settings here. And go to our project resource panel, right click composition settings at the very top, or we have the menu at the very top here. It says composition, you come down to settings that way. So it pulls up that dialog box we see whenever we make a new composition. Alright, make sure it's named appropriately. I'll call this bouncing ball. Bouncing ball 01, just in case we get into any other compositions. Alright, make sure we have our standard settings, the whole HDTV 1080-24, square pixels, and then down here for duration, underneath start time code should always be zeroed out. Underneath here, we're going to have a unique setup here. So this is for time. And starting from right to left, we have our frames, our seconds, minutes, and then hours. Right, so keep frames. So we don't deal with like tenths of a second. For the duration here, it's frames, right? And so depending on your frame rate, which should be 24, when we're dealing with 24. We can tell how much of a second the last part of the duration should be. So if we do 12 frames, that's half a second, right? We do 24 frames, that's a whole second, which is the same as just adding extra 1 to your seconds here. Alright, so if you want 15 seconds, punch in 15 in that second from the right space there. Alright, hit OK. My timeline should resize. Alright, so if you can't see the beginning or the end here, I'll come down here to the slider right here. It has a picture of little mountains and a picture of big mountains. Alright, zoom it off to the left, to the little mountains, so we can see our whole timeline here. Alright, and then since my circle was made with a different timeline, it's going to end at 10 seconds here. So I'm just going to grab this time block here, stretch it out 15 seconds, and press and hold shift to snap it to the end. Or just exceed the end. I'll learn a little more about snapping here and there in just a bit. Alright, so that way when I scrub on my timeline, which means clicking and dragging our slider back and forth, we can see the shape shows up at all points in time. Alright, cool. Alright, so to get started here, whenever we make a new shape, its anchor point starts in the middle of the composition, irregardless of where the shape is at. Right, so we want it to start on our circle, in the center of our circle here. So that leads us to a new tool up top here called the Pan Behind tool. And mainly this is just for relocating our anchor point, or pivot point here. So I'm click and hold this. Press and hold shift to snap. Excuse me, press and hold control and snap to the center here. And when you get that square highlight, that's how you know it's in dead center. Alright, hit my V key to go back to my selection tool. I'll click it and drag it up here. So this will be the circles or the ball's starting point, right up here. Alright. Going to make sure my slider starts at the beginning here. So when I lay down my first keyframe, it's at the beginning. I come down here to transformation, or transform, the transform node. And then we're going to be adding keyframes to position here. And the way we start that is we go ahead and hit the stopwatch next to position. It turns blue. And then we also get a keyframe, which appears as a little diamond on our timeline, right at that first frame where our slider is at. Okay, so if I move this down, right, and as long as this stopwatch is on, we got automatic keyframes, which means every time we move the ball, it adds another keyframe for us. Right? Now, since we have two keyframes, we have movement here in between. All right, any questions so far?
Any particular second?
No, this is just demonstration. All right, cool. So we got motion here, and something worth noting to help out once you get the bouncing going. We have this line here called our motion path, and along this line there are, it's hard to see here, there are little dots. Those indicate all the in-between frames that After Effects is automatically animating for us. So let me change this. That might help. Yeah, so small little dots here. They give you an idea of what kind of speed, what kind of acceleration our shape's going to be traveling along this motion path. Okay, so what I'm going to do, go ahead and delete this keyframe, marquee selecting it, excuse me, by clicking and dragging. Much like Windows here. So, marquee select when you want to select multiple icons. And then go ahead and hit backspace for delete to delete that keyframe. Then I can move my slider, say, to about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say 2 seconds here. All right, and then make sure I'm at 2 seconds. So specifically 2 seconds. I'm going to click on my duration right here underneath the canvas panel. Go to time pops up here. All right, and it shows that I'm at 1 second and 23 frames, which is right underneath 2 seconds. Go ahead and add a frame. So I'm right at 2 second frame here. I'm going to go ahead and add in my second keyframe by clicking and dragging. Bringing it all the way to the bottom for its first bounce. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put in the rest of the positional keyframes here. So I'm going to come down 2 more seconds. Make sure I'm right at 4 seconds here. Pop up a little bit. 2 seconds down. It's back down. I'm just going to keep on going until I reach the end here, the 15 seconds. Or 14 seconds here. And then for the last second, I'm just going to have it roll to the stop here. Alright, and so when I scrub through, clicking, holding the slider, moving it back and forth, when I scrub through, I can see the ball move in something like a bouncing across the canvas here. Alright, any questions so far? Okay, so let's see, I got, so 1, 2, 3, yeah, 3 bounces and a settle. So let's get to that point, and then we'll start refining our motion path using what we learned from Busy. Oh, I agree. I promise, it's way easier. Let's try to get the bounce at the bottom. All right. So we've mostly got it here. All right. So let's go ahead and let's refine this a little bit more. Right. So when the ball hits the bottom, it is more sharp than a smooth motion here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my Convert Vertex tool. Just click on it to give a sharp bounce on each of these valley bounces here. Alright, looking pretty good. Go back to my selection. And then for the peaks, here I'm going to stretch these out using the handles. Right, make it a little more robust. Well, you can use your selection tool here. I think the pen tool might work as well. Yeah, and the pen tool works too. Actually, it works on both sides simultaneously. It might be a little easier. Using my selection tool to position these keyframes in a little more convincing manner here. Alright, so looking pretty good so far. Wait, does everybody have sharp bounces, rounded off peaks? Anybody not have that yet? All getting there? Okay. Wait just a minute here. Alright, so next step here for a bouncing ball is that you want to ease it in and out. So bring it to the beginning, hit space bar. You can get an idea of what it looks like in real time. So this green bar right in our timeline, it shows us how much of it is pre-rendered, right, for the preview. If you don't have any green bar, it's definitely not going to be in real time. If it's kind of spotty like this, then you probably get every other frame here. Usually, if you open up your preview panel here, it'll tell you if it's not in real time. But since I'm not getting any sort of red text up here, it's pretty much real time, over 15 seconds here. So it doesn't look too convincing yet. Does anybody have ideas what will be next to make this a little more appealing as a bouncing ball? Like, what's missing here? Scaling?
Shadow.
Shadow, yeah, but as far as like animation wise.
I mean, right when it hits,
Right when it hits?
I mean, like right when it hits the ground, the ball looks really hard rather than like a bouncing ball would kind of go down, shrink a little bit when it hits the ground.
Right, excellent. Okay, so squats and stretch, right? So squishing and elongating as it's, taking on forces and whatnot. Yes, we'll get into that next. But what I wanted to get into first is the easing in and easing out. So the speed, right? So it gains speed right here, right? It bounces. It should be speeding up to the top and kind of hang here at the peak, and then does that over and over again a couple of times. So easing in and easing out is what that's called. So this is pretty simple. Pretty much a button click. Later on we'll get into the graph editor to tell us exactly the acceleration and how fast we can make it go and how slow we can make it go. But for right now, we're just going to go with default values here. So to start with this one, it would be an ease out, right? So make sure this is selected. Make sure this first keyframe is blue. I'm going to right click on it, hit keyframe assistant. Excuse me. Let's go ahead and hit ease out. All right, and so it starts off slow and then starts picking up speed. All right, and so after we hit the bottom here, it's going to come up. And then we're going to come to our third keyframe, which is the peak, and go ahead and do just easy ease on that. So it does ease in and ease out, which means as it approaches that keyframe point, slows down, and then as it exits, it starts to speed up. We'll do that to the rest of our peaks. Alright, and then as you can tell, our diamond icons start to change a little bit. So our first one, we've got something of like a arrow to the left. Lets us know it's going to ease out of that keyframe. And then our third keyframe turns into something of an hourglass where it has both ease in and ease out applied to it. And then each peak keyframe after that as well. Alright, and then just to add a bit more to the easing in and easing out, I'm going to start rearranging these frames a little bit. So we get a more believable speed. Right? So the first one should be pretty fast. If we bring these together, there's more keyframes to be considered. When we bring these two keyframes together, there's less frames to be considered, which means we'll operate a little faster, right? So I'm going to bring this one in just a little bit. So it falls faster. Bring this one in just a tad. Rise just a little bit faster, then just sort of bring everything in as it slows down with these bumps here. And just taking a look at these dots, right? You kind of want these dots to slowly build up inside the motion path here. Of course, there's a formula to all this, but this is art, so we can eyeball this, right? Alright, so a little better. And so ideally, after this first bounce, each gap between the keyframes are just getting a little smaller. So the bounces are getting a little smaller. Alright, cool. And so next up, y'all mentioned squash and stretch. So this is going to be messing with our scale here. So let's add some keyframes on there. So this can get a little tricky because we're going to be working with scale and rotation. Just so the ball looks like it's going to elongate as it's picking up speed, and squash as it hits the ground, and elongate again after coming out of the bounce here. The thing is, with our scale, you can't really scale it in every direction, right? Just our X and Y, pretty much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and line it up so I can elongate it real quick. So I'm going to start with adding turning on keyframes for my rotation. All right, so I get that first keyframe. Go up here to my rotation tool. Go ahead and line it up just a tad here. Scales off a little bit. Go ahead and zero that out real quick. And what I mean zeroing out is bring it back to default. So for scale is 100 and 100. All right. So yeah, you can try to eyeball it by resizing the corners here. You also come down here. You can also come down here to scale. Turn off your constrained proportions, and then punch in 100 and 100. Alright, so my rotation's in there. I want to say the ball is probably super stretched right before it hits. So somewhere right before that keyframe. I'm going to go ahead and add another keyframe for my rotation. So I'm trying to get that keyframe right before the bounce. Then I'm going to elongate it. After I turn on my keyframes for scale. I'm going to try to maintain the volume here, right? So if it's going to elongate, it means the sides come in, but the front and the back stretch out. Alright, and then I'm already missing a keyframe for my scale in the beginning, so I'm just going to bring it back and go ahead and zero out one more time here. So I'm going to start off the way it should. Alright, any questions so far? Yeah, keyframes on 3 properties. Anybody not have scaling and rotating keyframes up and going? Oh. It was there before though, right? Yeah. So let's hit Control Z a couple of times. Before we start keyframing everything, let's go ahead and get the right size there. Let's reshape the first frame, first keyframe, and then we can just use the corners to add the elongation and the squashing. All right, anybody else having trouble? Okay. Alright, so after we get that elongation in there, let's go ahead and squash it as it hits. So Here, instead of trying to punch in a certain value and trying to get that exact keyframe, we can go ahead and snap the slider to that keyframe. So grab and hold the slider, press and hold Shift. Bring it close to the keyframe you want it to line up with, and it'll snap right on there. And so at this point, then we can squash it as if it's hitting a imaginary ground here. So first I'm going to go ahead and rotate it just a tad so it's upright here. Go ahead and eyeball that much. Looks pretty good. Then I'm going to go ahead and resize it. Remembering to keep in the volume here, so excuse me, if it stretches out on the sides, then it should condense on the top and bottom, or the front and the back here. Scrub through, make sure it works. And then after that, after it hits the ground, it's going to re-elongate after it starts climbing. So I'm going to say right before we get to the top, maybe a couple frames right before, I'm going to elongate it just a bit here. So rotate it first. And go ahead and adjust the scale for the squash and stretch here. A little stretching in this case. And then as it gets to the peak, it goes back to normal. So then I can zero out my values here. So at this first peak here for my rotation, I can tell it's going to be a little bit off, to elongate it as it comes down. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and add a keyframe without making any values here. And the way I do that is come over here to rotation, and then on the far left here, kind of off screen, the far left, it's going to be an empty diamond. Press that so it turns blue, and that adds a keyframe for all my values right there. And that's so it starts rotating after the peak instead of before, and mess up my my rise on the first bounce here. Alright, right? And then from there, it's going to be a repetitive process. So you have the fall, elongate, squash, right? And stretch out as it goes to the peak, back to its normal size, fall again, etc., etc. So let's try to go ahead and iron this out.
I think I just need the rotation.
Squash in there, it's coming up, and a little bit of rotation. So it's like following, it's stretching along. You understand this something?
Oh, yeah, but this thing right here, I wanted to make it go down, and then it's supposed to speed up when it goes up and slow down. If I, like, is it better to make it like Bezier like that, or like,
Well, okay, so which value?
right now it's from here to here.
Is it position?
Yeah, it's just position.
So it's the way it's supposed to look in the graph over here is kind of like a follow motion. So it's so as it's going across one value, it's either rising or lowering the other value. It's mainly the y value. So the y value is supposed to level out at the keyframe as it eases in to a piece, eases out, and then just go straight down to the piece there. So at that point, it should be kind of like
Oh, yeah, so it's like this. Actually, now that I bring it up, wait, did I keep that, like, should it be SDA like that?
no.
No?
So let's put it over.
Like, should I make it like linear?
No.
No?
I'll play through it. See what it looks like.
Right now, does that.
Yeah. Let's start with linear.
Yeah.
Let's look everything.
Oh, everything?
Yeah.
I think everything else is linear. This.
The one next to it. Step.
You know,
So, yeah, select them all again. And I'll sit linear next to the step. So that should give us a constant speed. So
I wanted to do this, I thought it was go.
the same is not reading. So is the value. I mean, you're right. It's still in there in the piece.
I'll just add in the EVs for the heat source and reposition the heat fans. So close together, there's one timeline, recipes, or suggestions. So if you find that first thing for rotation, it's probably too much rotation at that point. And then probably start to still expansion further that closer to the or closer to the current part. Well, SQ frame is more. So we have a whole bunch there that's going to have to do with it. Try to keep it to like 2 rotations for the rise of frame. So it's like leading the class or leading the frame for the rotation. I think a little more stretch, elevation.
No, I haven't really. Yeah, this is the new practice.
It's unusually really nice.
Confidence.
Right. All right, cool. And so once we make it through ironing out all the scaling and rotation keys, remember less is more. Less is more. Let's go ahead and have it roll to a stop. And we'll use ease in for the last keyframe here. All right, so technically we're pretty much finished up for today. These will be due next class. We'll go ahead and post an assignment. We'll submit those online. Is there any questions? Concerns? Okay, cool. All right, so just let me know if anything pops up between now and next class. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll begin on lesson 1 next class, and then for next week, next Monday, we'll have our first quiz. Based on mostly all the things we've already went over and a couple of new things that'll be presented in lesson 1 in the book there. All right, take care.
I got one more question, and I'll leave you on for
No, no worries. What's up?
that stop at the peak, it's like a long pause. How do you get that off to make it like constant? Is yours like that?
How long of a pause? We might have a couple extra keyframes.
sort of
Oh,
ease in and out. I wouldn't worry about it. It's more of like a spacing issue combined with maybe just a couple of frames that are a little too close. But I'm not looking at real time. I'm just scrubbing through to see if like, all the motion is there. But that one.
see, I went above and beyond. I couldn't stop.
No, that's good. That's good, man. I mean, hey, what's cracking, dude? Is it what?
That's how it feels. I don't know how it's been together, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've been the same place for years now. But it's nice to finally get it done.
yeah,
So,
like it's official now.
yeah, we've been trying to get married for like 2 years now. Sure, it was 3 different occasions. And we've like put in a deposit, we're gonna do it here. COVID. Like, okay, we'll do it over here, make this work. Nobody can show up. All right, okay, we'll do it in ours. Probably never allow.
Look, hey, this is persistence.
Yeah, that's what counts, right? Thanks, man.
Yeah, no
Thanks. Did you get to see it?
He just sent me a picture.
Yeah. Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate it, dude.
I know. All right, glad to help. Glad to help. Thank you. You too. I'll see you Wednesday.